Today we're going to discuss the period after the American Revolution, basically talk about how the newly independent United States is trying to organize itself as a nation. The Organization of Government, the Confederation, Robert Morris, Land Ordinance 1785, the Northwest Ordinance 1787, Shays' Rebellion 1786-7, the Annapolis Convention, and the Constitutional Convention.
Correct.
So America's won its independence. But the question at this point is, what kind of America is going to emerge? So you have this period of the early 1780s is going to be a period of a lot of experimentation, different kinds of government. So they're breaking away from Britain, they're trying to change the way things have been done, and they wanted to try something else, try something different. You have to understand about any constitution is it's an attempt to try to solve a problem that countries had previously. For example, in Mexico, the president is limited to one 6-year term. That is because Mexico went through a long period, late 19th and early 20th century, of having these long periods of dictatorships. So to solve that, they said the president can only be there for 6 years, and that's it. In some countries, the Constitution bans the military, or bans the military from voting, because in those countries, the military had actively intervened and overthrown democratically elected governments. So to solve that problem, they did that. In the United States, the Articles of Confederation, Constitution, has very strict limits on governmental power and very strict safeguards on the civil liberties of the people, and try to solve the problems caused by the American Revolution. But the nation that's emerging, though, it's different from the one that is today. I'd say a lot of people try to talk about modern political problems in terms of what's happening in this time period, but the issues are very different. And there's something very different about the country this time period. You see, the colonists recognized the world was changing. They weren't afraid of it. They embraced it. They demanded change. They had a vision for the world, a vision for the future.
Visionary.
In many cases, yes. And they weren't going to back down. They weren't afraid to make their ideas known. They weren't afraid of other ideas. They weren't afraid of how the world was changing.
So what you're saying is they were pretty much determined about their own future.
Yes. They weren't sitting there wringing their hands saying, oh, what's going to happen? Or somebody's out to get me. He said, no. This is my future, my life. I'm going to take charge of it. I'm not going to sit around and feel sorry for myself. I'm not going to be scared.
A very good expression of courage, I'll say.
Remember, history changes, the world changes out of acts of courage. Not sitting around coming up with wild conspiracy theories or being afraid someone's out to get you. But what kind of experiments are they coming up with here to change this world? Remember, they're going from a British colonial society to a new American society, which meant, for one thing, all these old class systems are falling away very rapidly. Where the lower classes had to be very deferential to the upper classes. That's the way English society worked. Well, in the newly independent United States, that's not happening anymore. They're believing the idea all men are created equal. And even though in a lot of states the common man couldn't vote, that is, that man who did not have property still saw himself as equal. With all the new lands available, settlers were determined to strike out and head further west across the Appalachians, in the area between the tidelands and the mountains. The government's emerging now. You have some cases like New Jersey. New Jersey really doesn't do a lot. It's simply just 1776 altered its constitution to take away any references to England or colonialism. They're saying we're independent, we're basically running things the way they were. Interesting story about New Jersey. The last royal governor of New Jersey was Robert Franklin, Ben Franklin's illegitimate son. So the two did not see eye to eye on independence. It basically estranged them for the rest of their lives. Ben Franklin basically didn't leave him anything, as Will saying, because during the Revolution, his stand would have left him with nothing. But Robert Franklin's son, Ben Franklin's grandson, Franklin, got along together really well, though. Family things. But interesting thing about New Jersey was, and the 1776 Constitution was a minor loophole in finding who could vote. It simply said any resident who owns a certain amount of property could vote. It didn't say men only. So for a very brief time period, about 30 years, women who owned a certain amount of property could vote in New Jersey. Remember, you've got to read the fine print. It's very important in your law or contract. Fine print. Because it's making law, it doesn't matter what you mean to do, it matters what the law says. But, years before the secret ballot, they knew who voted for who. In the late 1800s, they realized the women's vote had determined a couple of elections, and the women's right to vote is stripped away. Women aren't allowed to vote in New Jersey until 1920, for over 100 years. Now, Pennsylvania is an interesting system. Pennsylvania has not one governor but three. Executive board. They're afraid of one man having too much power. They just have one, but Ben Franklin was one of these three for a while. Basically, the fear was one man's too much power, become corrupt and dictatorial, but if there's a couple others to kind of keep them in check, that's not going to happen. But the system that Pennsylvania had here proved to be just a little too unwieldy and complicated. And probably one of the most unusual was Rhode Island. Annual elections for every office, from city council, county, to state government, state legislature, up to governor, including annual capitals. The capital rotated among each of the state's 5 counties, going from one county to the next every year. So basically it's a constant campaign, constantly in touch with the people. They kept the system in place well into the 1800s. This is 3 examples. Pennsylvania, New England, divorces are made easier to obtain, but men usually have the rights to all the wife's property. In fact, what wasn't brought into a marriage became property of husbands. Custody of children automatically went to the husband. Basically considered to be property.
Yeah.
Now, you have women getting custody of children, that particularly young children, that come on really to the early 20th century. But that happening was it went way over the other extreme, where men ended up having very few, if any, rights to their children in divorces. A lot of states moving kind of back to the middle, basically. Some states moving to equal custody laws and things like that. Freedom of religion. Now, that's going to be changing and shifting over time. What it means, different states, it's mean different things. 1776, the Virginia Constitution guaranteed the right of free expression. But still, there were still some issues over freedom of religion, particularly taxpayer-supported churches. Essentially, what you had was an official state church. It is in these states you're required to tithe, give 10% of your earnings to the official church of that state. In Virginia, it was Episcopalian. It didn't matter if you're a member of that church or not, 10% of your earnings went to that church.
So they've still adopted, we're still using some of the same system they did in Britain, right? Because
Yeah.
they have a church there.
Yeah, the National Church, Church of England.
Right.
Yeah, Church of England, it's called the Anglican Church. It was brought to the colonies. It was the official state church in many colonies, but of course, if you just declared independence from England, you're a good patriot. You can't exactly say, yeah, I fought with Washington in the American Revolution, now I'm going to the Church of England on Sunday. It just didn't fit. So they changed the name from Anglican to Episcopalian, Episcopal Church. Assembly Church of Scotland becomes Presbyterian. The Methodist Church started as a reform movement within the Anglican Church before becoming an independent separate church by the late 1700s, early 1800s. Baptists emerged independently in England, but they're a very small sect at this point. In the American South, Methodists would predominate for a good portion of the 19th century. Roman Catholics, still very small in number. Mostly Maryland, areas like that. You don't see the large influx of Roman Catholics coming into the United States. You see that big wave of Irish immigration in the early 19th century into southern and eastern Europe in the late 19th century. But anyway, taxpayers had to support these churches, whether they belonged to them or not. New England, the Puritan churches, those are the official churches of the New England colonies, New England states. But eventually ends up happening around the time of the American Revolution is a lot of these colonies in the states, particularly in the South, start moving from official support of the Anglican church saying, well, you just have to pay 10% of your earnings to some church. It's not until 1791 that you have disestablishment of Virginia. Establishment that means ending taxpayer-supported churches. No official religion. As you can still go to this church, but you're not going to be required to send your money to it. See, that's what an official religion is. That's what establishment means. Is the state is saying this is the church of the people, whether you like it or not. You go there or not. Well, Virginia ends its taxpayer-supported church in 1791. New Hampshire about 1817. supposed to be a lot later than some of the other New England states, like Connecticut, 1818, Maine by 1820, Massachusetts not until 1833. Religious tests are still retained in many states. Some cases, to run for a particular office, you had to declare you were a member of a Christian faith. So atheists, Jews, any other religion, if it was not Christian, could not run for these offices. So the name by religious test is you have to basically prove you belong to a particular religion to run for that office. Now the question of where the Founding Fathers stood on this issue, well, like so many things in life, it's complicated. Now, what you have in the colonies is a great diversity of religious opinion, even though officially the states may be supporting one church or another. And even different families, it's a different religions. John Adams was a Unitarian, and Samuel Adams was a Congregationalist, basically going to those old churches in New England. Now, Unitarian, remember, it's basically a deist. They basically believe that the Unitarians believe that yes, Jesus was important and God created the universe, but they don't believe that God is actively involved in the affairs of the world. That is, God is not intervening in the world. They basically created the world, set back, and let it go on its own. Ethan Allen was a deist. He's very critical of organized religion. Like the Green Mountain Boys, Vermont or the American Revolution. Yeah. Charles Carroll Carrollton was a Roman Catholic. One of the very few Roman Catholics in any position of influence in this entire time period. His last surviving signer of the Declaration of Independence, he died in 1837. Member of the Continental Congress, later he is senator. Even though today, the largest Christian denomination in the United States is Roman Catholic. In areas like the American Southwest and the Northeast, there are very few states at this point. Our religious demographics are going to change over time. John Dickinson was a Quaker, lawyer, early critic of the American Revolution, delegate to the Continental Congress and the Constitutional Convention. Very outspoken, very popular lawyer, but Quaker. Ben Franklin didn't go to church. He's raised Calvinist. That's a very, very strict church. But it kind of came disenchanted with the organized religion. But it's very open, very tolerant of other churches, openly supported churches, Christian and Jewish, across Philadelphia his entire life. Very friendly with them, just late Sunday sleeper. Nathaniel Greene was a general in the Continental Army during the American Revolution, the fighting Quaker, the pacifist. Alexander Hamilton, guy with the $10 bill, Presbyterian. John Hancock, Congregationalist.
Now, I just want to point out, since you mentioned about fighting a Quaker, I would just like to point out, so wise men say just because you're a pacifist doesn't mean you will not defend yourself.
That's true. I think the story of Alvin York in World War I. He was a pacifist, conscientious objector, but became the most decorated soldier in World War I.
Really?
Interesting story. They made a good movie about him in the 1930s.
I remember that.
Yeah. Patrick Henry, Episcopalian. Thomas Jefferson was a deist. In fact, his political opponents tried to say he was an atheist. Jefferson was a very spiritual man, but he was a deist. Jefferson actually thought that Christ was the most important philosopher in world history, and actually took the Bible and just took all the sayings and statements of Jesus and compiled in his own Bible. Look at the Jefferson Bible. Again, a lot of these guys going to the official state church: Richard Henry Lee, Lighthorse Harry Lee, James Madison, James Monroe, Episcopalian, Robert Livingston, called the Declaration of Independence, Presbyterian. Thomas Paine was an atheist, the outspoken defender of the Revolution, demanding the colonies declare independence. Atheist. In fact, later in his career, he wrote Age of Reason. It was a tract denouncing organized religion. Very popular in an evangelical Protestant country. Peyton Randolph, President of the First Continental Congress, Episcopalian. Paul Revere, Huguenot, French Calvinist, so on and so forth. George Washington, Episcopalian. And see, great diversity of opinion on religious issues, which is why the Founding Fathers immediately recognized they couldn't have just one state church. That they had to have, that they're united by principles simply more than what church they went to. That they had to work together in unison towards a common, larger goal. That ultimately these decisions had to be individual decisions. Like I say, notice what you don't see on this list. Baptist church was a very small church at this point, mostly lower classes. And the very informal services, informal structure of the Baptist church really put off a lot of people. So people like Washington and these other guys, they prefer what they call more high church service, very formal service. They liked a system where what churches had to answer to someone higher in authority. Like I said, religions like Pentecostal or something like that, that's not come on the late 19th century. And compared to these very high church men, they would have been very offended by those kinds of services. Would they have defended someone's right to go to a church like that? Yeah. But they wouldn't have gone to that kind of service themselves. They're very formal men. You also have to remember, this is a very different time period. Obviously, yeah. Interests in trends in religion, particularly in Protestant thought, were very different. What you also see, though, is a flowering in this time period is a flowering of the arts and literature during this time period. Education expands rapidly. You've had 9 colleges in the U.S. before the American Revolution. But in the 1780s, we're adding 8 more. 6 more by the 1790s. Georgia chartered the first state university in the country in 1785, but the first state college to open was the University of North Carolina. Chartered in 1789, they were able to get their money together faster than Georgia did, and opened the University of North Carolina in 1795. Now, for primary education, some problems there. Thomas Jefferson in 1779, as governor of Virginia, pushed through a bill for elementary education for all free for children in Virginia, and also pushing for a state university. State university eventually was established later. Jefferson actually designed the main building for the University of Virginia, but Jefferson had problems getting the school system established in Virginia because the public school system meant all children be eligible to attend. It meant children of the wealthy and the children of the poor all be there together. And the wealthy upper-class parents objected to that. They didn't like their idea of their children mingling with the poor. For snotty upper-class reasons, so public education initially shot down in Virginia. Similar proposal of Massachusetts. Samuel Adams, as governor of Massachusetts, pushed for a primary school education system in Massachusetts, but again, same problem. Wealthy critics of having their kids go to school with poor kids. But nevertheless, though, schools spread the idea of community and nationhood, and small communities are starting their own schools here and there, but establishing it on a statewide system is taking some time. Now, the government that's being established, though, is the document called the Articles of Confederation. Now, Continental Congress approved this document in 1777, but it took all 13 states to ratify it. That wasn't accomplished until 1781. The biggest problem, though, was Maryland's holding out because they're upset about the Northwest Territory, the whole area from Pennsylvania west to the Mississippi River, the Great Lakes region. Several different states claimed that territory as their own. Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts. That meant a ton of money, all that real estate out there. And Maryland wanted that whole issue of who claimed that solved before they would ratify it. Well, the Continental Congress made some half-hearted promises eventually, and Maryland adopted it, ratified it, and the Articles of Confederation was in effect. Now, the Articles of Confederation, this is basically the first national constitution. It's the first constitution for our country. Very different form of government. Basically, it's just Congress. Continental Congress, one house legislature, making decisions. There was no president. There was no prime minister. Speaker of the House simply presided over the meetings, but he had no real governmental power. It was just Congress. There was no federal court system. Nothing like that. Well, the new national government had a multitude of responsibility and little power to carry it out. This was a collective substitute for the monarchy. Our Confederation government had full power over foreign affairs and questions of war and peace. It would be Congress that decided disputes between the states, not a court system. They had authority over coinage, the postal service, which was actually devised by Ben Franklin in 1775. The post office went under control of the national government. The national government has full power over affairs with the Native American tribes, the Northwest Territory. But there's no power to enforce ordinances or tax the states. They have no money except what the states agree to give them. But there is a provision for the entry of Canada to the U.S. at some point. The U.S. invited Canada in. Canada ever so politely declined. Any amendment to the Articles of Confederation took all 13 states to ratify. Had to be unanimous. The Articles couldn't regulate interstate commerce or foreign commerce. It took approval of 9 of the 13 states to approve war, ratify treaties, anything involving finances, military expenditures, took 9 states. Now, in Congress, they vote as a state, not as individual members of the Congress. Basically, each state gets one vote, but you might have several delegates from a state coming and discussing issues, but you have one vote as a state. Members of Congress chosen annually by the state legislatures. No direct election by the people. Americans are no mood for strong centralized government, so they kind of prefer this system, but states leave way to build their own state governments, avoid a divisive debates over distribution of power. But Congress has no power to deal with basically pressing national needs. Vermont is still excluded. Remember, at this point, Vermont is claimed by both New Hampshire and New York. But Vermont doesn't want to be claimed by either one. Basically, it's acting as its own independent country, but no one's really recognizing it as such. But Vermont is going to be excluded until it becomes its own state in 1791. I'll give you another important handout here, showing the difference between the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. And hang on to this one.
Wait.
Again, entirely different type of government. Representative, but very loosely representative, very little power. But in a lot of ways, the Articles of Federation governs a lot like the modern United Nations. Power of the organization, finances came only from the existing member states. They also have problems gaining quorums and gaining people of any kind of real stature to participate. So all the prestige and authority really was at the member level, member of the states. Well, among the people, you have large numbers of political organizations organizing, bringing countless new Americans in the political arena, or if you've been there before. In states, property qualifications for voting lowered dramatically in most states. 1780s. By the end of the decade, 5 states, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Georgia, North Carolina, Vermont, allowed all male taxpayers to vote. As long as you paid some kind of taxes, if you were a man, you could vote. But office holders, they usually had some property requirements in addition to sometimes even religious tests. Now, there's no universal male suffrage yet. That is, be an adult man and being able to vote because you're a citizen, that doesn't exist yet in each state. That's going to be coming along the next few years. Slavery. It's an issue, but it's being phased out in the North at this point. Only 3 states ended slave importation for the American Revolution: Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. New Jersey, though, still had slaves close to the end of the Civil War, close to the beginning of the Civil War. Remember, African Americans in the South, they usually fought on the Loyalist side. Because remember, the British promising freedom to the slaves who fought with Britain. Most slaves still at this point at the South. In the North, typically on the American side. About 5,000 African Americans fought on the American side. Some integrated units, but a couple of segregated units as well. After the war, a lot of loyalist African Americans ended up going to Canada, British possessions in the Caribbean. But slavery started to be phased out. Now, Vermont is the first state to ban slavery. That's in 1777 in its state constitution. There were a lot of slaves there, so it wasn't much of an issue, but slavery was banned. Massachusetts took a court case. They took a case to court over slavery, said slavery shouldn't be legal. Massachusetts courts agreed. 1780, slavery is banned in Massachusetts. They included Maine. Some went through a process of gradual emancipation, like Pennsylvania. 1780, they passed a law saying that slaves born thereafter would be freed when they reached the age of 28. It's trying to give slave owners a chance to recoup their investment. 1784, Rhode Island does something similarly. Slave born thereafter, after 1784, be free for men once they reach age 21, and once they reach 18. 1799, New York, and gradual emancipation. Slave born thereafter be free, but in 1817, they set a final date of July 4th, 1827, the date of final emancipation for all slaves in the state of New York. The South is far more hesitant. Some relaxed laws allowing owners of free slaves. A couple legislatures had bills introduced to ban slavery in those states, but those were quickly shot down. It's estimated that 10,000 slaves were freed by their owners in Virginia in the 1780s. But women, though, very little change for their position in American society. But now, this article's Confederation government emerges, pushing how you're going to run the country, how you're going to pay the bills, pay off all the debts from the war, and meet all the pressing problems of the nation. That's a serious issue. And one they find out very quickly that the Articles of Confederation simply is just not up to. Okay, so keep reading book chapter 7 and 8 for next time. We'll go into the Constitutional Convention and whatnot. If you have questions, we'll see y'all later.